I always knew they hated me. Even when Arthur slipped that diamond ring onto my finger in front of 100 guests, I could see the disappointment flicker across his mother's face, the way his father's jaw clenched like he was swallowing something sour. I was never supposed to be the one he chose. Standing under the chandeliers in that vast ballroom, I felt like a blemish on their perfect tableau. My dress was a little too simple, my smile a little too hopeful. I didn't have old money running through my veins, just the quiet pride of a mother who'd worked herself sick to give me a better life. That night, his mother, Veronica, took me aside. She didn't bother lowering her voice as she said, "This is a mistake. You don't belong here, and you never will." She handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for an amount so large it made my throat close up. "Be sensible," she murmured. "Walk away now, and you can have this. Spare us the embarrassment." I held that check in my shaking hand. The numbers swam before my eyes. It would have covered my mother's medical debts and left me something to start over with. For a moment, I almost took it. Almost. Instead, I folded it in half and handed it back to her. "I'm not for sale," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Veronica's eyes glinted with something mean and satisfied. "Then you're a fool." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite applause and forced smiles. Arthur hardly noticed. He was too busy accepting congratulations, basking in the approval of people who would never approve of me. I stood at his side, playing the role of dutiful fiancé, all the while feeling like a paper doll that could crumple at any moment. In the car on the way home, he finally looked at me. "My mother was only trying to help. You don't have to take it so personally." I turned my face to the window, hiding the heat in my eyes. "You think I should have taken the money?" He hesitated. "I think it would have been easier." Those words settled into my bones like ice. I realized then that he wasn't going to defend me. Not now, and probably not ever. That night, while he slept beside me, I sat on the cold bathroom floor with my phone pressed to my ear. My lawyer's voice was a low murmur, confirming what I'd already suspected. The trust was real. My mother had left everything she'd ever saved under my grandmother's maiden name. A hidden inheritance, waiting for me to claim it on my 25th birthday. Tomorrow. I looked at Arthur through the crack in the bathroom door, his handsome face slack with sleep. I felt nothing but a hollow, echoing silence in my chest. At dawn, I packed a single suitcase. I didn't leave a note. If they wanted to think I'd run away in shame, so be it. Let them whisper. Let them believe they'd broken me. They had no idea I was about to become the woman who would own them all. I didn't look back when I closed the door to Arthur's penthouse. I carried my suitcase through the quiet lobby, past the doorman who tried to catch my eye, maybe to ask if I was okay. But I wasn't ready to talk. Not to anyone. The sun was just rising when I boarded the first train out of the city. I chose a window seat and pressed my forehead to the glass as the skyline shrank behind me. Every mile I put between us felt like shedding an old skin. My phone buzzed with calls and messages I ignored. By noon, my face was already all over gossip blogs. Heiress-to-be abandons fiancé on the eve of birthday. The comments were cruel. She probably couldn't handle the pressure. Maybe she was after his money, all along. If only they knew. When I arrived in the seaside town where my grandmother had lived, I rented a small flat above an old bookstore. It smelled like dust and sea air, and I loved it instantly. I spent my 25th birthday in that empty room with nothing but a single cupcake and the paperwork my lawyer couriered over. By midnight, the trust was officially transferred to my name. The number at the bottom of the balance sheet made my breath catch. More money than Arthur's family had ever guessed. Enough to build an empire. Enough to become untouchable. For the first time in years, I slept without fear. In the following months, I worked in secret. I hired advisors, signed contracts, and made investments under the name my grandmother left me, Margaret Ellis. The world thought Margaret Ellis was just another ambitious entrepreneur. No one suspected she was also the scorned fiancé who'd vanished. I read every article about Arthur's family as if studying an opponent's weakness. They were still thriving, hosting charity galas, courting investors, expanding their real estate holdings. Arthur himself was photographed on yachts with polished women I didn't recognize. At first, the pictures hurt. Then they simply didn't. Every time I doubted myself, I remembered Veronica's voice in my ear. "You don't belong here. And I'd think I will make you regret ever saying that." I spent 2 years building my company into a force big enough to rival theirs. Just smart, relentless work. When I finally bought enough shares of the companies they relied on, I knew it was time to return. My lawyers arranged everything. A quiet acquisition, hidden behind shell corporations and trusted names. By the time the paperwork cleared, I controlled more of their business than they did. I bought a penthouse overlooking the city, the same skyline I'd once fled from, and scheduled a board meeting to reveal the truth. On the morning of that meeting, I stood in front of the mirror in my new office, adjusting my suit jacket. My reflection looked back at me, steady, polished, unrecognizable. I thought of the girl who'd stood trembling in that ballroom, clutching a check she refused to take. She was gone. In her place was the woman who was about to take everything they held dear. The conference room was sleek and modern, all glass walls and cold chrome accents. I arrived early and took the head seat at the long table. My attorneys flanked me, their expressions unreadable. One by one, the directors filed in, men and women in tailored suits, some older, some young and ambitious. They murmured polite greetings, clearly curious about the new investor who'd called this meeting. None of them recognized me. Then the door opened again, and Arthur walked in, his stride confident. For a fraction of a second, our eyes met. And something flickered across his face. Confusion? Recognition? But he blinked, and it was gone. He took a seat 3 chairs down and began tapping through emails on his phone, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. Finally, Veronica and Arthur's father arrived together. Veronica's gaze swept the table, her brows drawn tight with suspicion. She nodded briefly at me, not realizing she'd once tried to buy me off like I was disposable. When everyone was settled, my lead attorney stood. His voice carried across the room with crisp authority. "Thank you all for coming. We won't waste your time. As of this morning, Miss Margaret Ellis has completed the acquisition of 48% of your parent company's shares. Combined with existing proxies, she now holds controlling interest." The words hung in the air like a detonation. Arthur's head snapped up. His father's mouth opened and closed. Veronica went perfectly still, her face draining of color. My attorney continued, unflinching. "Effective immediately, Miss Ellis will assume the role of interim CEO while the board completes the formal transition." The room erupted in noise. Half the directors began arguing. The other half started frantically texting. Only Arthur looked directly at me, his eyes narrowing as if trying to pierce the mask I wore. I rose from my chair. My voice was calm, colder than I'd ever thought myself capable of. "You may remember me," I said, letting my gaze fall on Veronica first. "Though perhaps you never bothered to truly look." Veronica's lips parted, and for a moment she seemed on the verge of denying everything until the realization dawned. "No," she whispered. My name," I continued, "is Margaret Ellis. But you once called me by another. You called me a burden, a charity case, a mistake. Today, you can call me your boss." Arthur stood up abruptly. "What is this? Some kind of vendetta?" I met his stare. "No," I said evenly. "This is business." It wasn't a total lie. Revenge had been the spark, but success was its own intoxicating reward. Veronica's voice turned brittle. "You can't possibly think this will end well for you." I smiled, a small, deliberate curve of my mouth that I knew would haunt her. "I'm not worried." With that, I sat back down and motioned for my attorney to proceed with the agenda. The rest of the meeting blurred into procedural language and paperwork. But beneath every formality, the reality was clear. I had become the architect of their downfall. When the meeting adjourned, Arthur lingered by the door. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked uncertain.
"Small."
"Why?" he asked quietly. I studied him for a long moment. Then I said the only truth I had left for him. "Because you all taught me exactly what power looks like. I just learned to play better." And I walked past him without looking back. The days that followed were the busiest and most gratifying of my life. I didn't waste time gloating in headlines or taking petty jabs. That would have been too small, too easy. Instead, I showed up every morning before anyone else and left long after the last assistant switched off the lights. I learned every department, every figure on the ledger. I met with the division heads, took notes, and politely made it clear that I expected excellence. If any of them thought I'd be distracted by old grudges, they learned quickly that I wasn't here for theatrics. I was here to win. But that didn't mean I forgot. On my 3rd day in the CEO's office, a space that had once belonged to Arthur's father, I received a visit I knew was inevitable. Veronica appeared without an appointment, her diamond-studded clutch in one hand like a weapon she might brandish if she thought it would help. I didn't rise from my desk. She took the chair opposite me, her expression pinched tight with restrained fury. "I underestimated you," she said finally, as if the admission burned her throat. "You did." I agreed, meeting her gaze without blinking. Her eyes darted around the office, lingering on the framed certificates on the wall. My name was on each one. Margaret Ellis. A name she'd never bothered to learn because she'd never imagined it mattered. "Is this revenge?" she asked, her voice brittle as old lace. I considered that. "If it were only revenge," I said calmly, "I'd have dismantled you overnight. I have the resources to do it, and you know it." She flinched. It was the smallest motion, but I saw it. "This isn't revenge," I continued, my tone cool and measured. "This is ambition. You spent years reminding me I wasn't good enough, that I'd never belong. I'm proving that your acceptance was never required. You'll ruin this family, she hissed. I steepled my fingers and studied her. I don't have to ruin anyone. If you all perform well, you'll profit. If you don't, you'll lose. That's business. The difference is that now, the rules apply to you the same as everyone else. She opened her mouth to retort, then thought better of it. A flush crept up her throat, a stain of indignation she couldn't swallow. Your son will never forgive you, she tried. I almost laughed. Arthur's forgiveness was a currency I had no interest in collecting. I don't need anything from Arthur, I said simply. And if you were smart, you'd stop trying to bait me with sentimental threats. I'm not the naive girl you dismissed. Her fingers clenched around her clutch until her knuckles went white. You'll regret this, she whispered. Doubtful, I replied. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. For a moment, I thought she might say something else, some final threat, some plea. But she only turned and walked out, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm across the polished floor. When the door closed, I allowed myself a moment to exhale. Not out of fear or second-guessing, but out of satisfaction. Because she'd finally understood. I was in control, and nothing she could do would change that. Later that afternoon, Arthur tried to call. I watched his name flash across the screen, my expression utterly neutral. When the phone stopped vibrating, I set it face down and returned to my work. There was no lingering ache, no temptation to hear his voice. He belonged to another life, a version of me that no longer existed. That evening, as I rode the elevator down to the parking garage, the new screens on the walls played a segment about the company's new ownership. My face appeared beside the headline. Mysterious CEO Margaret Ellis acquires controlling stake in Thornton Holdings. The reporter's voice was hushed and reverent. Speculative. She tried to paint me as an enigma, a woman scorned, a vindictive ex-lover. I let them speculate. I didn't need to correct the narrative. Let the world wonder if this was revenge. Let them debate whether I was ruthless or brilliant or both. As the elevator door slid open, I stepped onto the concrete floor feeling nothing but an unshakable calm. I had walked away from their world and returned on my own terms. There was no shame in that. No regret. I was exactly where I'd always deserved to be, and it felt better than I'd ever imagined. By the end of the first quarter, the industry press had given up trying to frame my takeover as a scandal. Numbers spoke louder than gossip, and under my leadership, Thornton Holdings was outperforming projections in nearly every division. I knew it stung Veronica to watch me succeed without her blessing. She'd built her reputation on the illusion of control, the idea that everyone in her orbit owed her gratitude and obedience. Now, even the board she'd once ruled with an iron fist answered to me. My first formal company address was scheduled for a Thursday morning. The auditorium was packed with employees, hundreds of them in crisp suits, all curious to see the woman behind the headlines. When I stepped up to the podium, a hush fell over the room. Cameras clicked. I could almost feel the collective curiosity, the undercurrent of skepticism. I didn't smile or soften my tone. Instead, I delivered my plans with the same clarity and precision I'd brought to every negotiation. I laid out new growth strategies, fairer incentive structures, and the expectation that performance, not pedigree, would determine advancement. At the end of my remarks, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then, to my quiet satisfaction, the room erupted in applause. Later, as I walked back to my office, Arthur was waiting in the hallway. For a heartbeat, we simply looked at each other. He wore a tailored navy suit and an expression I couldn't quite read. You're impressive up there, he said finally. I inclined my head. Thank you. He took a step closer. I can't pretend I understand everything you've done. But he hesitated, searching for words. I never meant to hurt you the way my family did. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of the old ache. But it was faint, like a memory of pain, not the pain itself. I know, I said evenly. But you didn't stop them either. His eyes fell. No, he admitted quietly. I could have softened then, could have let nostalgia convince me he deserved some special leniency. But I didn't know him that. The truth was simpler. I no longer needed anything from Arthur. If you're worried about your role here, I said calmly, don't be. You're talented. As long as you perform, you'll remain in your position. I don't run this company on personal grudges. His gaze snapped back to mine, searching for any trace of bitterness. He wouldn't find it. There was no resentment left, only a clear understanding of what I had built and who I had become. I'm not here to punish you, I continued. I'm here to lead. Arthur swallowed. I believe you. And just like that, whatever connection we'd once shared dissolved into something sterile. Professional. I wasn't angry anymore. I simply didn't care. That night, I reviewed the quarterly reports alone in my office, the city's lights glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Every success was its own quiet vindication. Every percentage point of growth was a reminder that I never needed their approval. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a message from my attorney. Another deal had closed, a smaller acquisition that would tighten my control over key suppliers. I tapped back a single word, confirmed. Then I set the phone aside and leaned back in my chair, feeling a satisfaction so complete it bordered on serenity. People always assumed revenge would make you bitter or hollow. But I'd never felt more whole. I wasn't a girl clinging to old hurts. I was a woman who had proven her worth beyond any doubt. When I finally locked up and stepped into the quiet hallway, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the darkened glass. Confident, unapologetic, triumphant. And for the first time, I smiled, not because I'd beaten them, but because I'd finally become the person I was meant to be. By the start of the next quarter, the entire industry had taken notice. Analysts began referring to Thornton Holdings as the most compelling turnaround story of the decade. Shareholders who once doubted my intentions were now praising my leadership. Some nights, I would sit in the penthouse I'd bought, far above the city that once felt too vast for me, and read the reports aloud just to hear the words spoken plainly: record profits, operational efficiency, market confidence. Veronica's social circle had also begun to shift. The same women who used to hang on her every word now whispered behind her back. They'd built their respect for her on the family's reputation. With me holding the reins, she was just another matriarch clinging to old status. I didn't feel sorry for her. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. One afternoon, a reporter cornered me in the lobby as I left a meeting. Her microphone was thrust forward with an eagerness that would have intimidated the person I used to be. "Miss Ellis, what you say to those claiming your takeover was motivated by personal vendetta rather than sound business strategy?" I met her gaze levelly. "I would say they're entitled to their opinions. But facts don't care about opinions. Can you clarify?" "Our profits have increased by 26% since I assumed control," I said calmly. "Our client retention is the highest it's been in 8 years. If that's what personal vendetta looks like, perhaps more companies should be led by women with something to prove." The clip went viral before I even got to my car. By evening, my phone was flooded with messages from business leaders, investors, and journalists all wanting a quote. But I didn't care about the noise. Let them speculate, praise, criticize. I was too busy building something lasting. That week, I launched a new initiative to fund promising startups, led by women from underrepresented backgrounds. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been called a gold digger, a charity case, and now I was the one writing checks large enough to change other women's lives. The program's announcement was met with widespread acclaim. Even some of my former detractors grudgingly admitted it was a visionary move. But I didn't do it for praise. I did it because I knew exactly how many doors stayed locked to women who looked like me, women who didn't inherit power but had to seize it. On the evening of the launch, I hosted a reception in the company's grand ballroom. The same space where Arthur had once slipped a ring onto my finger. The same chandeliers, the same gleaming floors. But this time, I wasn't a guest. I was the host. When I took the stage to deliver my remarks, I looked out over the crowd, leaders of industry, founders of companies, philanthropists, artists. Not a single face among them regarded me with pity or doubt. "I stand before you not because someone gave me permission," I said, my voice ringing clear across the hush, "but because I decided that no one could define my worth but me." Applause broke like a wave. Cameras flashed. I felt the moment settle into my bones. Permanent, irrevocable. Afterward, Arthur approached. He looked different in the warm light, smaller, somehow. "You've built something extraordinary," he said. His voice was low, as if he wasn't sure he should be speaking to me at all. "Thank you," I replied. He hesitated. "I never thought I never imagined you'd do this." "I know," I said simply. And I meant it. They'd all underestimated me. That had been their mistake. He shifted uncomfortably. "I wish things had been different." "I don't," I said. My tone was soft, but unyielding. "Everything that happened brought me here." He nodded slowly, the realization dawning that there was nothing he could say to rewrite the past or diminish what I'd built. I left him standing there, surrounded by a sea of people who no longer cared about his last name. I walked through the ballroom, accepting congratulations and shaking hands. And with every step, I felt the certainty solidify inside me. This was exactly where I belonged. I thought I'd seen every test of nerve a boardroom could offer, until the auction. 6 months into my tenure, the company's most critical contract came up for renewal. It was a logistics agreement so lucrative it would guarantee our continued expansion. My competitors wanted it badly, including a consortium quietly backed by Veronica's remaining allies. They must have thought this was their chance to humiliate me publicly, to prove the young woman who'd stolen the company wasn't capable of defending it. They underestimated, as always, how well I'd done my homework. On the morning of the auction, I arrived at the Grand Regency Hotel ballroom, wearing a deep navy suit and a calm expression. My team flanked me, carrying thick binders and digital tablets. I could feel dozens of eyes tracking my every step. Some hungry for gossip, others hoping for weakness. But I gave them nothing. When the bidding began, the offers rose quickly. My opponents tried to drive up the price, hoping I would flinch. Instead, I watched the figures climb with detached composure. I knew our limits precisely, and I knew how to leverage our performance record to justify a premium. When my final bid was read aloud, a hush swept the ballroom. It was bold, but not reckless.
Strategic.
The moderator looked around the room, waiting for any counteroffer. None came. I held my breath until the gavel came down. Sold to Ellis Strategic Holdings. There it was, unmistakable, final. A victory no one could spin into scandal. As the applause broke out, I glanced across the aisle. Veronica was sitting beside one of the rival consortium's representatives. She looked smaller than I remembered, her face drawn tight with disbelief. For one suspended moment, our eyes locked. I didn't gloat or smirk. I simply inclined my head a fraction, a silent acknowledgement that we both understood exactly what had just happened. She'd tried to reclaim her influence, and she'd failed. When the crowd dispersed, Arthur approached me in the hallway outside the ballroom. "You did it," he said quietly. "I did," I agreed. There was no hesitation, no need to soften the reality for him. He seemed to study me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "You're not the person I knew." "No," I said, my voice calm and certain. "I'm not." And I felt no regret in admitting it. Growth had required me to let the old version of myself die, and I had never been happier to bury her. That evening, I returned to my penthouse alone. I poured a single glass of wine and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights glow like embers. In my early 20s, I used to dream of belonging to their world, of finally being good enough for the right name, the right pedigree, the right table. Now, I understood that real belonging had nothing to do with other people's approval. I belonged to myself. The next morning, headlines splashed my photo across every business publication. Ellis secures landmark deal, solidifying control. I read each article with a serene satisfaction. They could debate my motives, but they could no longer question my confidence. In the weeks that followed, morale inside the company soared. The employees knew what I had accomplished, and more importantly, they trusted I was leading them somewhere better. One afternoon, as I was reviewing proposals in my office, my assistant brought in a small velvet box with no note. Inside was the engagement ring Arthur had once given me. I studied it under the bright lamp. Once, it had symbolized everything I thought I wanted: love, security, belonging. Now, it was just a relic. Without a second thought, I closed the box and set it aside. I didn't need tokens from the past to validate the woman I'd become. And as the sun set behind the skyline, I realized this was the final proof. I was free. Winter arrived, and with it, the annual charity gala Arthur's family had hosted for decades. It was the event they'd always used to cement their standing, an evening of crystal chandeliers, whispered alliances, and the unspoken hierarchy of old money. This year, as the majority shareholder and CEO, I was the honorary host. My team suggested I cancel the tradition, but I refused. I wanted them to see that I wasn't afraid to walk into any room, especially theirs. The night of the gala, the ballroom gleamed with white roses and silver candelabras. Guests arrived in black tie, their curiosity as palpable as their perfume. Some offered congratulations with genuine warmth. Others delivered compliments with thinly veiled resentment. It didn't matter. None of them held any power over me. Halfway through the evening, I stood near the stage while the auctioneer prepared to announce the charity totals. Veronica hovered across the room, her posture rigid. She hadn't spoken to me all night. When our eyes met, she looked away. Arthur approached first. His tuxedo was immaculate, his expression polite. "You've raised more tonight than my father ever did," he said, almost as if it pained him to admit it. "Good," I replied calmly. He studied me for a moment. "Does it make you happy?" I considered the question carefully, unwilling to answer from reflex. "It makes me satisfied," I said finally. "Happiness isn't something I rely on other people to provide, and certainly not something I measure by their approval." His gaze dropped. I wish I'd understood that sooner. I inclined my head. "So, do I." But there was no malice in my voice. Only truth. When he drifted away, Veronica finally approached. She moved slowly, as though she needed to gather her strength just to cross the floor between us. This was always my night, she murmured, her voice soft enough that no one else could hear. I built this tradition. I met her gaze without blinking. And now it's mine. Because I earned it. She looked at me, searching for weakness she could exploit, some flicker of doubt or apology. She found nothing. I underestimated you, she admitted. Yes, I said. You did. A flash of bitterness crossed her face. Will you take everything? Leave nothing for my family? I don't need to destroy you. I replied evenly. You're doing that well enough on your own. Her breath caught, but she didn't deny it. I turned to face the crowd as the auctioneer stepped up to the microphone. The hush that fell was instantaneous. Every eye trained on me. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, thanks to your generosity and the personal matching donation from our host, we have raised a record-breaking sum for the Children's Cancer Trust. Applause thundered through the ballroom. Camera flashes sparked like fireflies. I felt none of the old insecurity, none of the desire to shrink and disappear. I had become a woman who didn't just occupy space. I commanded it. After the speeches, I mingled with the guests. People I'd once watched from a distance now approached me with deference. They asked for advice, offered partnerships, and tried, sometimes too eagerly, to align themselves with my success. And in every conversation, I felt only calm, detached certainty. Later, when most of the guests had drifted home, I walked through the empty ballroom alone. I paused near the dais where Arthur had proposed all those years ago. The memory no longer hurt. It felt like a scene from another life, a story I'd outgrown. A staff member approached timidly. Ms. Ellis, would you like us to box up the flowers for you? I smiled, feeling a wave of contentment I hadn't expected. No, thank you. Let them go to the hospital tomorrow. As I left the building, I glanced back one last time. For so long, I'd believed that belonging in that world would finally make me whole. In the end, it wasn't the ballroom or the name or the money that had fulfilled me. It was the knowledge that I had built something unassailable, and no one, least of all the people who tried to break me, could ever take that away. Winter passed into early spring, and the company only grew stronger. Every milestone confirmed that I had done what they all insisted was impossible. Not just survive, but lead. Thrive. I traveled frequently, overseeing expansions and meeting with partners. Every city I visited seemed to greet me as an equal. I was no longer the girl whose worth depended on someone else's last name. Late one evening, after a trip to Singapore to finalize a logistics hub, I returned to my penthouse to find Arthur waiting in the lobby. He stood when he saw me, hands in his pockets, looking tired in a way I recognized too well, like someone who'd spent years trying to please everyone but himself. Do you have a minute? He asked quietly. I hesitated, then nodded. 5. We stepped into the small lounge off the lobby, where the lights were low and the city glimmered beyond the tall windows. I heard about your latest acquisition, he began. Congratulations. Thank you, I said, my tone perfectly calm. He shifted, as though searching for a way to begin. I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us. I didn't answer. I'd learned that silence often told the truth better than words. I don't expect you to forgive me, he went on. But you deserve to hear me say it. I'm sorry. For not defending you. For not seeing you. For being too weak to stand up to my family. His voice caught, but I felt nothing except a faint, almost abstract sympathy. I don't hate you, Arthur, I said. But you and I are done. We have been for a long time. He nodded, his eyes falling to the floor. I know. For a moment he looked like he might say more. Apologize again. Or ask for something I wouldn't give. Instead, he only straightened his shoulders. I hope you're happy, he said finally. I smiled. Not out of malice, but because it was the truest thing I could offer. I am, I said simply. I'm exactly where I was meant to be. He took a breath, as if bracing himself against the finality. Then he turned and walked away. I watched him go without regret. Closure, I realized, wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was just an absence of pain. The next morning, I returned to my office before sunrise. The city was still dark, and the air held the chill of a late winter morning. I set my bag on the desk and looked around the space that was now entirely mine. The bookshelves lined with case studies and contracts. The sleek glass table where I'd made decisions that changed everything. Years ago, Veronica had sneered that I didn't belong. That no matter what I did, I'd never be more than a burden. A girl desperate for validation. Now, no one dared question my place. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window as dawn broke over the skyline. Light touched the tops of the towers first, then spilled down to the streets far below. I felt no longing, no emptiness. Just a quiet, steady sense of triumph. The phone on my desk buzzed with the first calls of the day, partners wanting updates, editors requesting interviews, employees eager for direction. I let it ring a moment longer, savoring the peace. I thought of my mother, who'd worked herself to exhaustion so I could have options she'd never known. I thought of the girl I used to be, sitting in the dark with tears she never let anyone see. I wished I could tell her this. You won. You didn't just survive them. You built something so strong it could never be taken away. And you did it without becoming cruel or small. You stayed your own person. You stayed better. When I finally answered the phone, my voice was calm and sure. This is Margaret Ellis. Because that was who I was now. No one's charity. No one's victim. And the world would remember my name.